We are the Borg. Lower your shields and surrender your ships. We will add your biological and technological distinctiveness to our own. Your culture will adapt to service us. Resistance is futile.
Hello, welcome back aboard, faithful viewers and listeners, to this final episode in Series 2 of the Hit or Miss Star Trek podcast, or this very special episode in crossover terms of the Silver Screen podcast. We are going to be today reviewing and discussing the movie Star Trek First Contact. I say we because I can't do this on my own. I am joined by two very special guests, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, starting with Eryn to my right.
Hi, I'm Eryn. I host a podcast with my wife. She's unable to be here, but we're the Spinal Frontier Pod, and we're excited to talk about Star Trek First Contact.
Awesome. And and who else is joining me today?
Hi, this is Jeff Aiken. I host the Starfleet Leadership Academy. It's a leadership development podcast told through the lens of Star Trek. So I think it sounds like you have gathered yourself a couple of Star Trek fans here.
Awesome. Well, it was only fair. It was only reasonable to have Star Trek fans discussing a Trek movie. So before we get into that, the Trek podcast does have a couple of sections. There won't be a hit or miss section as you might usually expect, or a couple of the other things, because there simply won't be time since we're reviewing a movie. But I did want to start off with my usual section, which is basically where I get to know my guests, as I haven't really spoken to these two before. So that would be the section that I call Hailing Frequencies Open.
Hailing Frequencies Open, sir.
Excuse me. Right, so basically, not to put you on the spot, but this is basically where I ask three questions to you that you probably won't be prepared for in advance. Hopefully you're not too shocked by them, and we can get some nice answers and find out a little bit about your history with Star Trek. And the very first question in that regard is, what was it that introduced you to the world of Trek? What was it that made you kind of think, oh, I want to carry on watching this? And can you remember what the very first episode or movie was that you saw? And I'll start with you again, Eryn, just because you're closer on the screen here.
So my parents were big into Star Trek, and I remember watching The Next Generation with my mom. I don't remember the first episode I watched, but I do remember the spaceships. And that is what kept me tuning in every week.
Fair enough. Yeah, I'm a bit of a spaceship nerd myself, as you'll probably know. If you follow the channel, I've done enough Eagle Moss reviews and talk about all the ships and things. So it was the special effects and the starships that caught your imagination then.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
All right, fair enough. Well, we all got to have an inroad somewhere, I suppose. And as I say, I think that was part of the appeal for me. But my very first things I remember watching were original series. It was the early 90s, and people in lizard costumes and things were a lot more impressive back then.
So true. Mine's not too dissimilar from Eryn. I grew up, my mom loved Star Trek, and it's a little older, so like you watched the original series. And I remember when The Next Generation was gonna come out, I was in grade school and eagerly anticipating it coming out. And I remember, talking about the spaceships and the effects. I remember, I was a kid and I knew the original series stuff was just so corny, so campy. And watching The Next Generation, I remember thinking, I'm just like, it's not possible to top this. This looks so good. And it is, right? Some of it kind of sort of holds up, pretty well.
I think we all suffer a little bit from those rose-tinted glasses if we've seen these things when we were younger, because I remember thinking the Tholian Web was the greatest special effects sequence in sci-fi at the time when I first saw it when I was young, and then I watched it back just a few weeks ago and was like, wow, there's really not that much that's impressive when you look at this. But at the time, I was like, wow.
Yeah, you watched it again doctored up, right? Like they remastered. Yeah, and so it's like it was even less back when you watched it the first time.
Absolutely, but this is after I've seen Enterprise do it and stuff. Sorry, Eryn. Go ahead.
Oh, no, not at all. I wish that it was easier to find the original versions of the original series, because the remastered's great, but I kind of want to see what it was like.
There are some, I think, that were better because they were more kind of imaginative, almost, I think, the way they were done originally. And that's the way I remember watching them. So there are a few occasions where I've watched the updated ones on the Blu-ray just because I'm making my way through it, and I'm like, ooh, if I watch this again, I'm going to go back to the original because it just has a bit more charm, and I remember it. There's instances where it doesn't, where you just would never have seen a ship like in Charlie X or I Mud before there would be no ships there, and now you get a chance to see a shiny new CGI ship, which is kind of cool. But
yeah,
there's things where they've quote unquote improved the special effects where I just don't think it has the charm or the appeal. Things like the giant green hand grabbing the Enterprise.
Right.
There was no need to update that. It was designed to look ridiculous. Of course it was. Yeah. Enough talk of special effects anyway. So the second question then was going to be, if you had to pick 3 episodes or movies from anywhere in the Trek franchise to represent the very best of Trek, or to introduce somebody who's never seen anything to try and basically lure them into the world of Trekkie fandom, what would be your 3 choices then? And again, start with you, Eryn.
Okay, so first thing that comes to mind is Darmok from The Next Generation.
That's a good choice, and it hasn't come up nearly enough. It's a very good choice.
I just think it's great because everybody gets a little bit of something to do. If I was showing somebody Star Trek for the first time, I'd show them that because it really encompasses what it's all about. Yeah. My second choice would be the season finale of Lower Decks season 2. I don't remember its name.
First Contact.
Oh yeah, first Contact. That's great. I remember being blown away, and I at the end of it, I was like, oh yeah, this is Star Trek.
Yeah. I was like that with Lower Decks in general. I think the last 2 episodes of Series 1 had me on board for that. I was like, okay, this is genuinely, it's funny and everything. And then we get to the end of the seasons and we're like, no, we are still Star Trek, So, yeah, very good stuff. I love that episode as well. But again, being a ship nerd, I just liked the starship that appeared in it. I think that's my overriding memory of that episode. The what is it, Obena class, the highly upgraded Excelsior class or whatever it is that it's supposed to be. Plus, there's something cool about them just ripping the entire hull off the Cerritos to try and win the day.
Finally seeing Cetacean Ops.
Oh, that was so good.
Yeah.
Lieutenant Kimmerloo and Lieutenant Matt, 2 whales who outrank Harry Kim. You can't get better than that, can you? And, what about yourself then, Jeff? Sorry, we've only got 2 out of you so far, haven't we? I'm getting ahead of myself. So what would be your third choice? Sorry.
This one's tricky. Off the top of my head, I want to say Year of Hell from Voyager.
Ooh, wow. Okay. You don't think it would be frustrating for a new fan to know that it basically didn't happen at the end of it?
I think that would set up their expectations well for Voyager.
Reset button. Yeah. I do love those episodes, and it is really like the dramatic stakes and everything are really awesome until the very end when it's just like, and it didn't happen. It's like, oh, disappointing. Yeah, there's a lot to like there, though, definitely. And I think, as you say, if they went along on the journey, they would hopefully feel the emotions of it and might like it. So, yeah, it's a nice little mix. We've got a Next Gen, a Lower Decks, and a Voyager. So, awesome. Fair enough. And Jeff, what would be your 3 choices then?
Well, first, I'm so impressed, Eryn, that you were just boom, here's 3.
I know, right?
Yeah, you asked the question. I'm just like, oh my goodness, just 3? I mean, just let me think about that. 3 out of 800. It's not
like there's over 800 episodes.
Yeah.
Jeff, come on.
It's like, come on, it's just be so easy. But I think, wow. So the first one that came to mind for me is I think my favorite episode of all of Star Trek. And I think it encapsulates a lot of what Trek is about. But I think it's also fun in a way that people didn't expect it to be yet. And that's from the original series, Balance of Terror.
Oh, awesome.
Oh,
love that episode. Yeah. And I think, I actually have had so many conversations with people as we as a society have progressed through diversity, equity, and inclusion and our understanding of it. And how, that powerful line that Kirk has in there about having no room for bigotry on this bridge. And how now in the first quarter of the 21st century, like that's just not good enough, anymore. Yeah. We don't have room for bigotry, period. But in 68, holy crud. Like that's shots fired, to come out with something like that. So I love that episode.
I love that it's again for the 60s, it's really brave that it kind of humanizes the enemy, because we know all of the kind of metaphors, the allegories the Romulans were representing, and yet the episode is like, now this is just another captain on just another ship with his mission in mind, and he's also, kind of browbeaten and he's just happening to be on the losing side of this one. But there's something really tragic.
He's got a family at home he cares about, and I think that's one of the things the original series did really well was, and it's weird. I think that Eryn and I've had this conversation before, where you can't really say humanize in Star Trek, right? But I think for us, you could say humanize is the enemy, in a way, And I think that's one of the things it did just brilliantly.
Yeah, certainly makes the enemy more three-dimensional than just the demon under the stairs or whatever else. Again, it's the 60s. We weren't that far from the McCarthy witch hunts and stuff, so
exactly,
it was quite a unique idea.
And I think if you're introducing someone to Star Trek, you can't not watch The Next Generation, right? I think like everything that has happened in Star Trek since then, it's the basis of, and oh my gosh, there's so many incredible episodes in there. I landed on the drumhead.
Oh, okay. Wow. Intense.
And I think, and that's kind of why, right? Because I think it captures some of what we get in, one of the greatest episodes of Star Trek ever, Measure of a Man, right? Like Drumhead captures some of that. Just that, we've come to call it lawyer Picard, right? But also just, I think more than that, it captures that inquenchable thirst for justice that Star Trek demands, and really demands so well through its captains in a lot of cases. That speech that Picard gives in there, where he's just laying it out on, that's Star Trek to me right there.
Excellent choice. Again, one that hasn't come up at all, I don't think, in anybody's lists, because they tend to go for the likes of Measure of a Man, because of the bigger, flashier speeches, or a lot of people pick The Inner Light just because of the dramatic kind of emotional impact to go for the Next Gen episode. But the Drumhead, I think, is an excellent choice because it also emphasizes the kind of no easy answers, I think, that Star Trek can be brave enough to do sometimes, and not many other shows would, which is kind of like, you don't know who the good guys and who the bad guys are, and it's not necessarily as black and white as all that,
Exactly.
So I can't wait to hear your third choice.
Well, I went more fun, right? And so for me, I looked at this one not too long ago on my podcast, and it really hit me watching it. When you watch an episode for a podcast or for an interview or for something like that, you look at it a little bit more critically, I guess, in a good way, right? Just you're wanting to get all the stuff out of it. And this episode just hit me on how it's just a celebration of all things Star Trek, and that's from Deep Space Nine, Trials and Tribulations.
Yes, that one has come up before.
I'll bet it's a blast, right? It's like, look, it's next to zero stakes, it's a flashback thing. Everybody's kind of making fun of themselves, but in a way, I think it's so respectful to all of the Trek that came before it, and introduces it in a way that's super fun.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think it would be weird to watch that before watching The Trouble with Tribbles.
I know.
The way they filmed it and comped in the actors over the old footage was, to this day, I still can't spot really how it was done, and that's just really impressive.
Yeah, it's amazing. Amazing. Really, I had read that it was the technology for Forrest Gump, the film there really kind of opened the door for that. But I think a lot of it too, I think if I remember right, when I was doing my research for the episode, like Terry Farrell as Jadzia just really struggled, with like, I have to do this thing and mirror this person, but I'm not there. And just all the weirdness of trying to film it. But it was done flawlessly.
Definitely. If you have a chance, by the way, if you haven't already seen the special features and things on the Blu-rays, not to start plugging merch and everything, but I did recently watch all of that because Trouble with Tribbles came up in my original series watch, and then on the disc it has like Trials and Tribulations and all the behind-the-scenes making of that and everything, and it is incredible watching the sort of the shots before and after, and you can see the shot from Mirror Mirror, which they took the Cisco moment from, and how they kind of composited him in place of Marleda. And as you said, the one shot on the bridge where Kirk kind of looks over to some nondescript crewman, and then now it's Jadzia Dax, and as you say, Terry Farrell's like, so where's my eye line, because we can't tell Shatner to change his eye line, can we? So it's a fascinating look into how they did that, and then how they did like set extensions to certain things where there's like a scene from The Trouble with Tribbles for half of the image, and then the other half is a reconstructed corridor set where Cisco and Dax are standing, and yet they meld together so flawlessly. It's brilliant. That's just a fantastic achievement in special effects that it doesn't get enough of a credit, I think, for that reason, because yeah, man, blending decades apart TV episodes as if they were in the same space and without any joy invisible, I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, the way they did the lighting and everything, it's just, it's a masterpiece.
Absolutely awesome. And as you said, just funny as well. Just a romp. So awesome. Right, my third and final question in this section, and this is the big one, so apologies. It was going to be simply, out of all of the series that we now have, what is your favorite or the best out of all of the Star Trek series? Who wants to go first with that one, and who needs more thinking type?
I'll go first.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm going to go with The Next Generation, not just because it's my first Star Trek, but I think it does a good job bridging the gap between Roddenberry era Trek and more modern Trek. So, like, if I was going to binge watch with somebody today that was new to it, I think I'd pick The Next Generation.
Yeah, I would have said the same, not to bias anything, but yeah, that definitely would have been my choice. But so feel free to pick something else, though, Jeff. By the way, so,
well, for me, it's Deep Space Nine. Like, there's never been a question for me. Yeah, and I think for me, it's just because I and Eryn, I can't disagree, and I've never thought of Next Generation in that context before. I think you're so correct, and I think that what Deep Space Nine did was it grabbed the relay baton, right, and it took it a solid 2 or 3 seasons to pick that baton up, right? A rough start, but once it grabbed that baton, it kind of took that post Roddenberry Trek and it interrogated what Star Trek was about in a way that no other series has. And I think it did it really well. But I will say, it's too soon to tell, right? But there's a really strong chance that Lower Decks could take that title for me. That series, and it snuck up on me the way it did it, but it is it's like I said, like with Trials and Tribulations, it's so respectful to this Trek that came before it, but it also just grabs it and moves in such a great way. It was the end of the first season when Shax, spoiler alert here, when Shax died, and I felt that, and I was like, how did that happen? Oh, it's because this show done, though, yeah, right. Well, that's what we do in Star Trek sometimes with other things, but no,
we
I
also
think
had a season break to sit in that for a while.
Yes, yeah. No, I think Lower Decks is just brilliant, and I think if it can maintain the trajectory it's got, it might take over that spot for me.
Yeah, I think for me personally, I think almost all of the new series have a chance not to necessarily become the best, but to become very well regarded in my heart, because I've always kind of liked Discovery, but it always feels like it's fighting against itself. Yes. It doesn't want to get out of its own way in terms of, like, we have to stick to one story per season and cannot deviate and cannot do fillers, and then it does the odd filler episode, and they're the best episodes of every chosen season that they do, which is frustrating. But yeah, Lower Decks, Prodigy, I think the last few episodes, that has a real chance to become my favorite Trek show if it keeps up that kind of reverence and emotion as well. And Picard, I absolutely did not like season 1, but then season 2, if it sticks the landing, and then with the big announcement that season 3 is basically a next gen reunion, there's a chance.
So exciting.
I know. I just, again, not to make this, I did this on my podcast, but I just watched all of season 1 of Picard for my podcast, which was a huge mistake. Hey, eat this large pizza all in one sitting. I did, but I didn't not like it, right? But when I finished watching the first season the first time, I said to my partner afterwards, I was like, this is my least favorite Star Trek right now. Like, I still enjoyed it, but it's my least favorite. Upon a rewatch, I feel that way even more strongly. And I actually, to really dive into fandoms, I was like, this really just hit me like, what if Star Trek decided to do Mass Effect, the video game? Yeah. That's Picard season 1.
Yeah, that is how that felt.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, but not even just that. I mean, we just recently reviewed Stardust City Rag, and I was like, this is like if you told somebody who'd only seen Star Wars to write a Star Trek episode. It really is. It's like, we'll chuck a cantina in there. We'll have some roguish, handsome Han Solo type. We'll have vindictive. You can have hope, but I need to kill the people that wronged me. And I was like, this was written by a Star Wars fan. It must have been, surely. But yeah, it's a shame that it didn't find its feet in that first season until, well, not even until the only episode I really rate, but it is a great episode. It's Nepenthe, just because of the whole reunion of Riker and Troy with Picard. So I do love that episode, but that's the only one.
That was a really good episode that had a lot to say about authenticity.
Right.
Just through Troy's conversation with Soji and the relationship with Soji and Kestra there. It was a really, I think if I was just going to watch one episode of one of the newer Star Treks, I think I'd pick Nepenthe.
I can see that for sure, because it does do a lot with that. It uses the character. It's not just a matter of it is the emotional impact of reunion with the characters, but like you say, it uses them to such great effect when Troy is basically the one who has to talk Picard around, like, no, go easy on this little girl. Effectively, she just, everything she ever believed was a lie, and her whole world's been shattered, and you're just kind of like, well, get over it, come on. And it's nice to have the empath, I guess, there to tell them, like, no, come on. Calm down. Emotions are a real thing. So, yeah, fair enough. Well, that's enough of a chat, I think, on Trek then. So we've got another TNG, another DS9 fan. So it's all good. I think almost everything's, well, certainly all the older ones have been represented somewhere. So, excuse me. As I say, we will move to the next section then, which will not be the hit or miss section because we don't have time. But hopefully, we may have you on in a future attempt to do that in another series. But as I mentioned, we will go straight into the review. I will begin my analysis of that. And this episode, as a season finale, just like with season 1, we're reviewing a movie. And the movie is First Contact, as I mentioned. The 8th Star Trek movie, second next-gen movie. And I just wanted to start with a few fast facts that I have written down. And if you guys want to comment on that, by all means, feel free, or chime in with any sort of information or anything that you know of your own. And
okay.
We'll take it from there to start with. So the first fact for the audience I have here is that Rick Berman basically wanted this movie to be a time travel story, but the writers, Ronald Moore and Brannon Braga, wanted a Borg story. So they basically had the idea to do both. After debating which time periods and then deciding what could be hokey or too expensive, they settled on the birth of the Federation, with Brannon Braga saying that the final image of the Vulcans was what brought him to the table in those pictures, and it really crystallized in his head. It was originally called Star Trek Resurrection, and was very similar to the finished movie, except that Picard was going to take Cochrane's place in history. He had a romance with a contemporary woman called Ruby, who would later be Lily, and it was Riker who stayed on the ship to fight the Borg, who at this point were still just faceless automatons. The Borg Queen was added to give more life to what the studio considered to be the boring zombie-like drones. So it was their basically proviso, and it was a dissatisfied Patrick Stewart who suggested switching Picard and Riker's storylines, which makes perfect sense. When writing Zephyr Cochrane, it became clear that the writers were basically writing an analogue for Gene Roddenberry, a flawed man from whom sprang a grand vision, which I hadn't realized until quite recently, and I was like, oh, wow, it really it slaps you over the head with that when you know it, doesn't it? So, yeah. And,
you just said that, and I'm like, wow, wow.
Yeah,
absolutely. That's the first I'm hearing that, but yeah, I can see it.
If you go back and watch it with that in mind, and especially when you see the scenes when it's like, oh, I didn't build this ship to go to the stars. My vision was dollar signs and islands of naked women, and oh, don't try to be a great man, just be a man. And I was like, oh, wait, how did we not notice this before? Right. But yeah, I don't think you're a saint, but you did have a vision. So there we go. And the title Star Trek Resurrection was ultimately changed after the release of the 4th Alien movie stole that subtitle, which became First Contact. So that's the reason why we got that title. That, and I don't think there's any resurrections in the film, so I don't get why it was called that anyway. So yeah. As became tradition, the judicious use of existing pieces was employed to make the film sets, including turbolift wall sections dating back to the motion picture and the sickbay set borrowed from Voyager. Quite fitting, given that there's an EMH cameo. Similarly, a Voyager cargo bay is the Enterprise's weapons locker, which I, again, had never noticed because you don't really see that much in that scene. It's very dark. So, just a couple of random facts. This is the first Star Trek film in which the transporter room doesn't appear at all. And in the opening battle, you can see the Millennium Falcon really clearly as a sort of in-joke. It's underneath one of the attacking Akira-class ships, and if you go looking online, there's some incredibly clear images. It's supposed to be not discernible, but it is very, very much so if you actually have like modern freeze-frame technology and stuff, so it's there. But, yeah, and
wasn't it Industrial Light? Like there was a story there, right? And like
Yeah, it was an in-joke kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's so cool. I love that that's there. It's just proof, right? That it's all right, Star Wars and Star Trek. It's just that one happens to be in a galaxy that's far, far away.
The last little bit of information then, on redesigning the Borg, it was decided that the assimilation process should look like it came from the inside out instead of vice versa. And the blinking lights on the various drones actually spell out the production crew members' names in Morse code.
Oh, that is cool.
It's so weird, but cool, isn't it?
Oh, I love a detail like that.
Yeah, you'd be so thrilled if you were one of the production members, even knowing that nobody's going to know what's happening. But like, yay, that Borg's say my name. And just finally, I've mentioned this before as one of the sort of hilarious errors that we pick on, even though with affection. But I have to just mention, because it's still so funny to me, that Picard states to Lily that there are 24 decks to the Enterprise E, yet a security officer states that the Borg control decks 26 up to 11. Later in Star Trek Nemesis, during the battle with the Remans, the ship somehow loses shielding on deck 29, allowing them to board. So your guess is as good as ours when it comes to the Enterprise E's decks. Or
he says there's only 24 important decks, right? That's for the captain. He's like, those other ones are just whatever.
It's that long hallway that all the ensigns sleep in.
Yeah.
I love, because being, the nerds that we are, there's always an attempt to kind of explain these things. And the Okuda's text commentary on First Contact, when it gets to that scene, is like, we surmise in our heads that it's because the final two decks are classified, and Picard didn't want to admit their existence to Lily. So it's like, those are top secret, so he can't admit this, as if she would know. And I'm, all right, fair enough. Whatever pleases you. Awesome. So yeah, any other kind of facts and figures that you guys are aware of, or any thoughts on those that you wanted to share?
This was the movie. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
This movie scared me so much when I watched it. I think I was 10 years old, and my cousin took me to the drive-in theater, and that the change in the assimilation process from the inside out, when that implant burst out of Picard's cheek in the very beginning. I was terrified, and I was locked in for an hour and a half.
Yeah, it's surprising how horror. I mean, I'll probably get into it, but it's surprising how much horror imagery there is to the Borg in this, and it really does. It kind of. I mentioned it in my review of. This is relevant, I promise, but my review of Unimatrix Zero, when I was like, the reason I hate that episode is because the Borg here, when you're assimilated, it's a terrifying, horrific, body horror ordeal, and yet in Unimatrix Zero, they're like, yeah, we'll just cosplay as the Borg for a week. It's fine,
Yeah.
So it just jars when you've watched the two together, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyway,
I think because they were super intentional, right, for production and making the Borg look more scary and horrifying. This was the first movie to have a PG-13 rating, which is a pretty big deal. But it's hard to. I don't know. I still it's been so many years since this film came out, and I still don't know how I feel about the changes they made. To them. I mean, I think it works for the movie, for what they were doing in the movie, but in the scope of what the Borg are, it's kind of an outlier in some ways. And I don't know. I just don't know how I feel about it still.
I see, personally, I like what they did, but as I said, I think it was a question of, they didn't necessarily have to take that into the TV series and run with it. They could have left it as just a movie thing. Yeah. And I think that's where it kind of fell apart, when Voyager was like, let's take all of this and then we'll adapt it into our story. And it's like, no, it doesn't quite work as well.
For a story about integrating humanity and the flesh to Data, and have that be a step towards his humanity, kind of like the temptation there. Yes. It made sense that the Borg Queen was slinky and seductive because she was seducing him. And it made sense that they borrowed some design elements, I feel, from H.R. Geiger, I feel like is an influence in that. It didn't make sense to keep it through Voyager because they weren't dealing with that theme anymore.
I will get into the movie, I promise. And the way I'm doing it, I'm trying to keep things kind of brief and not brief, but try to keep things moving along. So I've just got it into, I've called it scenes, but it's not really. It's just chunks of action where I'm kind of going to mention what happened and give some thoughts on it. And then I have some kind of talking points and some questions to throw to you too, and to ask you kind of your opinion on. So if that's okay, I'm going to jump in and go ahead and do that. So
that's good.
As I say, feel free to interrupt me at any point, though, if you wanted to sort of comment on something, or if there's something that I missed, or if I've gone past a scene you want to talk about. It's just very free, free flowing, open forum. So feel free to jump in. Don't be shy. So yeah, the movie basically opens with Captain Picard's nightmare it's a memory basically of his assimilation by the Borg. In Best of Both Worlds, Next Gen, obviously. Obviously, things look a bit different now. There's a bit more advanced of a special effects, which is the first thing you have to get over in terms of visual continuity, because it's not quite the same, but, again, it's a dream. We can forgive it. I will say I don't remember if I was young enough not to care, but watching it back now, I really hate the kind of fake out, oh, I've woken up from the dream. Oh, I wasn't really awake kind of thing that happens at the start of this movie, because it's so cheesy and such a cliche now.
To me, that just like planted the flag, though, that like, hey, like what's totally a Star Trek movie, also kind of a horror movie too. Like, because it's such a horror movie trope to do something like that.
That is true, I suppose. It does set that tone, and it does make you nervous, I think, because that's the point, isn't it? So, awesome. Admiral Hayes basically informs Picard the Borg have attacked, and he knows because he can hear them, but the Enterprise has been assigned to patrol the neutral zone because Starfleet don't trust Picard, so he instead just storms off and decides to listen to Berlioz in a huff until Riker comes back to him and tells him, we're not doing anything exciting here, these are the boring reports, and then they get the audio that comes onto the bridge speakers from the battle, which sounds horrendously bad, obviously.
Yeah.
As the Borg are attacking the fleet, and Picard, as is often the case with these movies, decides he's going to break orders, and the Enterprise is going to head to where the battle is and join it. And I love this part of the movie, this epic space battle. I'm a sucker for this. I can't really say enough good things. It's just
I love all the ships. Like I said before.
That's one of my talking points. Absolutely, I'm going to bring that up, but I just love that it looks so good, because we were related to what you were saying, Jeff. We watched Next Gen and we're like, it doesn't get better than this special effects wise. Then you watch this and you're like, oh yes, it does. Yeah.
It gets so much better.
Everything's so souped up, and you're already excited. And then it's like that Vince McMahon meme where it's getting levels of excitement, because it's like, oh, fantastic new ships, look awesome. Oh, it's the Defiant. Oh, there's another ship coming in. It's the Enterprise. So it just ramps you up further and further till you're like, oh, enough.
So the ensign on the Defiant piloting it is Adam Scott.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, from Parks and Recreation.
Yeah, from Parks and Recreation. He's kind of a local celebrity where I live, and it was just every time my wife and I are like, it's him.
I love that, because I had no idea until I read that somewhere, and I was like, oh yeah, it is. Because again, it's one of those things that's so fast, and it's a dark, kind of busy scene.
He's so much younger too.
Yeah, of course. But that's going to be pretty badass. You piloted the Defiant against the Borg. That's something for the resume. But obviously we get traditional Worf kind of, oh, today is a good day to die. We're going to have to ram them because the Defiant's wrecked, and then the Defiant survivors are beamed aboard. We're not supposed to question, I presume, how, considering shields are up. But never mind. And Worf boards to Commander Riker, giving him a few sly digs about, the Defiant being a tough little ship, as a callback to Thomas Riker's appearance in DS9.
Yep, I love that.
Nice. And I just love the, you do remember how to fire phasers to Worf, and then Worf just staring at him like, I will kill you. It's brilliant. So yeah, just lots of great moments in there. And then again, Picard using his knowledge to target an area that doesn't seem like it's a weakness, but it basically destroys the Borg cube. However, before it's destroyed, it ejects the new Borg sphere, the newest shuttlecraft from the Borg that appears for the first time here. This next scene is weird, because I'm not sure, again, I love it, but I'm not sure the logic tracks, that it's like they get caught in the temporal wake of the sphere and see Earth as it is, which is completely assimilated because the Borg have changed history, but they aren't affected because they're in the temporal wake, so they decide they can continue on course and follow the Borg back. And it's very kind of like, does the time travel logic there really work? Because my head is kind of done in.
Right, there's I think four to 83 different time travel sets of logic that they can choose to, and they just let's take number 18 and 43 and overlay those, and that's how we're going to make this make sense.
It's astounding to me how people don't just time travel all the time, given that it's apparently so easy.
So simple.
Well, they did in the original series, I mean, that was the episode I was mentioning the other week. Assignment Earth opens with Kirk just making a log like, Starfleet have assigned us to go back to the 1960s and do some research. And I'm like, really? Just where did that come from?
It's like my favorite time travel thing, because every other time they time travel, like, we're going to go around the sun, we're going to do this, and then in Assignment Earth and here, they're like, hey, let's just hit the button that says time travel. Just do that.
I've copied the Borg signature. Let's just jump back into the same thing then, and we'll end up back where we came from. It'll be fine. Yes, Doctor Who logic, I think, isn't it? Really the faster turn switch.
Little timey-wimey.
Yeah. Either way, it does give you the exciting moment, because I remember the first time I watched this movie again, in terms of the way that it's kind of structured like a horror film at times. There is something really chilling about the the population is 9 billion, they're all Borg, and that's Earth. It's like, oof. I'm not sure in what timeline that actually happened, since the whole point was that the Enterprise stops it. But again, I'm not going to think too much about that. So,
well, I loved how they did it too, because going in, the viewer knows you're going back to 21st century Earth, and so the way they laid those breadcrumbs out on, I'm reading a lot of methane, I'm reading a lot of this, and so as Star Trek fans, we're conditioned that they're going to make a comment on pollution in the late 20th, early 21st century. Okay, that's going to happen, and you just kind of settle into that, and they're like, all Borg, and you're like, it's even worse than I thought it was going to be. No.
Yes, exactly. And I remember they used that for the teaser poster as well, because they said something like, this is Earth, the population is 9 billion Borg, what are we going to do about it, or something along those lines for the teaser. And I was like, wow, that's how you get people's butts in seats, I guess. So fair enough. I basically paused here when they're following the Borg back through their own time corridor, or whatever you want to call it, for the first opening talking points, which is just, do we all agree that the direction at these opening scenes is just fantastic, or what? I mean, especially the battle. It's great, isn't it?
It's to this day, it's still just a joy to watch.
Absolutely. I wish I'd seen it on the big screen. I never got a chance. I was too young, unfortunately. So Insurrection was the first film I saw on the big screen. But I remember, funny story about my personal life, that I was so obsessed with Trek and with this movie when it came out in general, that from the local Indian corner shop next to me, they had one of those things where it's 1 or 2 racks of videos that you used to be able to rent out, which again is how old I am, because these are video cassette tapes for VHSs. And I rented First Contact once a week for 11 or 12 weeks in a row. And the Indian chap who's a friend of the family who runs the shop in the end was like, just keep it. You've paid for it 4 times over. Just keep the video. And to be fair, nobody else wants it. It's a Star Trek film, It's amazing that he stocked it at all. So that was how I got my first VHS copy of First Contact.
I love that.
It's such a bizarre story, and I loved that video though. I cradled that like it was a child, honestly. The scene. I think again we have to mention that Jonathan Frakes is the director of the film, because talk about stepping up. I mean, I know he'd done episodes and things, but like I said, the space battles here, the actual acting, even scenes he's in, just so impressive.
I think some of the best space battles in Star Trek were from the last season of Deep Space Nine and the Dominion War. Those were great, right? But I don't believe those scenes could have happened without this Battle of Sector 001, right? I mean, it's just this set the bar for what a Star Trek battle could be.
No, that was going to be my point, is that basically this is a pivotal moment in terms of sort of Trek effects, because this is where Alex, Yeager, and ILM just invent, I think, 5 new classes of starship that we've never seen before, that would go on to become hugely famous, especially, as I say, in the DS9 war scenes, because they needed to pad out the, you couldn't just have Miranda classes and Galaxy classes everywhere, so they started appearing constantly on DS9.
Really good use of the movie budget.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, they're great. They're great ships, and that was my next talking point, was going to be, do you have a favorite of the new Alex Yeager ships, and which is it?
It's got to be the Akira class.
Oh, I knew everyone was going to say that, and that was mine as well.
It's hard to not. It's just, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous ship.
Yeah. It's, I think I'm becoming so familiar with it now that I'm at that point where I'm like, oh, look how impressive the steamroller class is. And then I'm like, but it's still not quite as good though, is it? It's the Akira class all the way that takes the cake. That was just a brilliant piece of design. You can tell why they basically, when they were making Enterprise, they were like, use that. We like that design, even though it completely makes no sense chronologically, Anyway.
I like to think of the Akira class as a retro design.
Yes. So let's have it. It's a homage to the NX era, of course.
Utopia Planitia was feeling nostalgic when they designed it.
Absolutely.
They're like, for this first contact day, we're going to go ahead and do a throwback for a limited time only. One of the things I love in this opening scene, so overall in the movie, I mean, they were little nuggets, but they pulled in Deep Space Nine and they pulled in Voyager in little ways.
Yep.
I loved how they brought the Defiant into this, and how, like, even on Deep Space Nine, like, they made mention, briefly, of this at a super high level. I mean, they could have done, but it's just kind of cool because I think there was I don't know, just it's neat that there was at least some tie back between what was happening on television and what was happening on the big screen.
Yeah, that was another little fact that I read that I was kind of amazed in terms of like the lack of communication, I guess, and yet the way that you understand what happened is that they were originally planning to have the Defiant destroyed in this opening battle, and then I think it was it Robert Wolf or someone, whoever was the DS9 producer, it might have been Ira Stephen Bear actually, came to the people that were making the movie and was like, "You can't do that. We need it like the next week."
Yeah. He's like, we're going to do that later. You can't do that now.
So he was basically the one who inadvertently, I think they were like, well, what do you suggest we do? And he was the one that was like, throw in a line about how it's, I don't know, adrift but salvageable or whatever. So I think that's his contribution to the film, is like, we have to explain that the Defiant is damaged, but it can easily be picked up and taken to DS9 and be fine next week when we need it, So. But I guess we had to get Worf on board somehow, so it achieved that end as well. So, no, awesome. I'm
so glad they did. I have a lot of Worf thoughts in this film, and one of them happens in this one. You mentioned it, where Riker's kind of nudging him. Hey, do you remember how to fire phasers? But it's a real thing, right? So Worf has made a dramatic transition from being the tactical officer on Enterprise to essentially being the commanding officer of the Defiant over on Deep Space Nine. And when you're the person who does the work, and then you become the person who manages or leads the people doing work, like, you better be getting rusty on your operational skills, because you shouldn't be doing that work. And so as a leadership nerd, I love that moment, because it's one of those things where, hey, we all know, like Riker's like, hey, we all know you're not what you used to be behind the trigger, because you shouldn't be, but I'm gonna nudge you and have a ha-ha, because now we're both commanders.
I guess. That's one way to look at it that I hadn't considered, but I guess you are right, is that it's kind of there's a bit of camaraderie there. It's like, well, I guess we're kind of both equals, I suppose, in a way now, because
they're colleagues. Like, I mean, they're ranked differently, but I mean, their jobs are so similar. And and I think, and that's the thing, because Worf's primary job was, Sisko was commanding the station, and so Worf was going to command Defiant unless Sisko was on board. And so Worf had that weird, I'm commanding officer, but I'm also first officer kind of a thing. And so he had a unique camaraderie with Riker.
I think he was kind of considered to be the first officer, the Starfleet version of the first officer of the station, because obviously it was Kira.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure he was like second officer or first officer if we're going by Starfleet ranks. So there was a lot of kind of, like I said, command, and that's why he ended up wearing the red instead of the yellow. So which must have confused the heck out of anybody who hadn't watched DS9 coming into this.
Right.
I'll move on anyway to the next parts of the movie then. So we arrive in Montana in April the 4th, 2063, and we meet Zephyr, Cochrane, and Lily as the Borg open fire. The Enterprise quickly destroys the sphere, conveniently setting up an Enterprise Season 2 episode, and they register where they are and why. So Riker says, the humanity, the race of humans is weak after World War III, and the Borg plan to stop first contact at a time when there's little resistance, which could be a key moment. Excuse me. The team beams down, and Lily basically shoots at them with a machine gun, but she faints when Data does a terrible special effect on her by jumping down to catch her. Hasn't aged well, unfortunately, that one scene, but never mind. So she's revealed to be suffering radiation poisoning, and Crusher takes her to sickbay. Picard and Data discuss the historical irony that it was a weapon of mass destruction that brought it an era of peace. And then there's one of the most humorous scenes from the movie, of which there's a few, but with basically Picard touching the Phoenix and trying to explain to Data about, he never could in the museum, but now he can touch it, and it connects you to objects in a personal way, and then Data trying to imitate it and sort of I can detect imperfections, but it's no more real to me. And just the brilliance of Councillor Troy popping her head out and like, would you three like to be alone? It's just, it's the killer punchline, I think, there, isn't it? So, I love that scene. I love all of the kind of humorous moments, and anything that Troy does in this film is great. So we then get LaForge heading down with the repair team. But again, in terms of sort of, you want horror movie ominousness, he asks Porter to check the environmental controls because it's starting to get hot in engineering. Just a throwaway line. Nothing to worry about yet. But the two engineers crawl through the vents to address the problem, and we hear mechanical noise off camera and see them scream. And things get very horror movie-esque. So, sensing this, obviously, Picard leaves Riker in charge on the surface, and him and Data beam back to the ship, where it's revealed that the temperature on the Enterprise is now like that of a Borg ship on the decks that they control, however many that might be. The Borg try to access the main computer, but Picard has Data quickly lock them out with an encryption code. Crusher in sickbay gets frustrated because she's near engineering, where the Borg are basically taking over. The lights start to flicker, and again, she mentions how hot it's become. So, yeah, nervous moments, I think. So my point here, I was going to make the talking point, was that I think, again, in terms of not to just constantly big up Mr. Frakes, but I think the building of tension and the way this kind of mimics a horror movie like that is so good. And I was curious if the slow build-up worked as well for you two as I think it does for me here.
I think it worked really well for me. And I mean, I just remember watching it as a kid and being on the edge of my seat the entire time.
Yeah, did you remember, did you really know what happened, when you watched it for the first time? Were you aware of, like, it's getting hot, what does it mean, what's going on?
I was pretty quick on the ball with stuff like that when I was that age. I had the Next Generation technical manual that I'd been reading through. And yeah, so I picked up that wasn't normal.
Yeah,
that's not standard. That's deviating from standard by this much.
And what about you, Eryn? Did you find yourself really nervous and tense in these scenes, or were you just going with the flow?
So nervous. As an adult, though, I recently watched it to prepare for this, and the scene in the shafts and engineering where the two people get assimilated and you never see the Borg. It's so classic horror movie of
it is, yeah.
Like the skittering and the shadows playing across the wall. I actually thought it was pretty funny imagining a Borg setting that up.
It doesn't make a lot of sense if you think about the logistics of it, because how does it work? But, it is just a horror movie scene. It's the chance for Frakes to get the classic. We're not going to see the monster, but we will see the reaction to it. So you're zooming in on the screaming face, but as you say, picturing the Borg, dragging the female engineer up and like across the tubes and whatever to be able to try and get into a good position to inject the nanoprobes would have been a hilarious, like, sort of, get you out, because there's not a lot of space,
It was very extra and good foreshadowing for how much the Queen loves drama.
That's a very good point, actually. Yeah, yes, she is a bit of a drama queen.
Right, yeah. I think so much of what made this work was the editing in this part, in the way they put it together, because you've got that just totally. I've never like how ridiculous that whole Jeffrey's tube shaft thing, whatever scene is, where it's just that is ridiculous. But you've got the horror happening there. But then on the bridge, you've got people like, hey, we've got this weird thing happening with environmental controls. In sickbay, you've got Dr. Crusher like, hey, this is going on, and what's going on with the heat? Like, just kind of day-to-day operation, and the way they kind of layer that all in, because you're like, no, there's something happening, do something quick, and they're just like, this is kind of weird, let's investigate it. It's just it's normal.
I will say, every time I watch this film, when Picard first beams up and Worf is just casually sitting in the captain's chair, and he just sort of swivels around and he's like, I was about to send a security team, and I'm like, a bit of urgency, Worf! The Borg are on the ship, for crying out loud, man! And he's just sat in the chair like, something's wrong, just the controls, I don't know. Send a team, maybe. Just another casual Thursday for Worf,
Right. He's like, this is happening. But I think this really sets up where a lot of the exploration of the film is going to go with Picard, because now he walks in. Now, I don't know. Imagine you suffered a terrifying, horrible trauma, and you've spent the last 8 some odd years working to try to recover from that, and then all of a sudden you're kind of back in it. But not only are you kind of back in it, your experience from that trauma is really, really helpful and useful, because he's able to come in and be like, this is what's wrong. This is what's happening. This is the plan that we need to do. And so he's living in this place where he's in command and he's making things happen, but he's also re-dredging up a lot of that trauma and experiencing that in real time. And that's going to play out through the rest of the movie in very dramatic fashion. But I think this is the point right here where it really starts to hit.
Definitely. And although there's a lot of very flashy acting that I think I could commend Patrick Stewart for no end, he has to get plaudits for me for delivering just the exposition in this scene and yet making it so kind of embedded in his trauma that you never think for 1 second that what he's saying is just literally we're getting the audience up to speed, because it's like it's 39.1 degrees Celsius, like a Borg ship. They knew they were doomed. They must have beamed aboard without being detected somehow. They'll set up a hive in engineering, and then they'll assimilate the Enterprise, and then the Earth. And I'm like, oh my word, how are you delivering exposition but making it seem like I'm not just hearing, rattle off a list of plot points? Why don't you?
So well done.
Very good.
It's also really ominous because throughout the entire movie, the away team on the planet below has no idea the struggle that's happening on the ship and the danger that everyone is in.
Yeah. That's the other thing that I found really weird whenever I watch the movie, is that he makes a brief reference to, you can't talk to them because we've lost contact, but we don't know why yet. And then they just get on with the Phoenix mission without giving it a second thought of like trying to contact. And to the point where the Enterprise, like it approaches them in that very last scene, and he's like, I'm sure they're just here to give us a send off. How do you know? Right. You know, what the heck's going on?
We're here to say goodbye. Hey, why are they firing on us?
Oh, that's my ultimate pet peeve in this movie, is like talking about the Borg Queen being a drama queen. There was no reason for Data to waste 3 torpedoes there.
Seriously.
And it would have scared the crap out of Cochrane, who didn't even acknowledge it. He'd be like, what are they doing? Just 3 torpedoes streaking by within 10 feet of us. What's going on? But that's getting a bit ahead of myself. So I'll move back to where we were, which is the escape from sickbay. Obviously, the Borg are about to burst through, so we get the brief Robert Picardo cameo playing the Enterprise EMH, not the same one from Voyager, and giving it the classic Dr. McCoy, I'm a doctor, not in this case, doorstop joke. And then just a funny moment as he tries to find some kind of common ground with the Borg and talks about, Starfleet research has detected that your implants cause skin irritation. Could I get you a cream or something? They just back him into a wall. Again, that humor in the darkest of moments, it's great.
For me as a kid, that was actually so unsettling because it really grounded the experience of having an implant, like bursting out of your skin, like, oh yeah, that would be irritating. And well, I was also afraid of doctors. So
where was I anyway? The Borg. Yes, the Borg have invaded sickbay. So then we have the armory sequence where we are mentioning what I'm calling Chekhov's plasma coolant tanks. We're bringing them up now so that we know what's going to happen. Like Chekhov's gun, it will go off in the final act. So we mentioned that here, and then Picard goes full John McClane. Even having a little vest equivalent of the Starfleet uniform to wear, as he basically locks and loads and gives it all, the Borg will ignore us, but one more thing, if you encounter crew members who've already been assimilated, don't hesitate to fire, because you'll be doing them a favor. So, yeah, things getting quite intense. And then almost as if on cue, we cut to the surface and we get the drunk Deanna Troi scene, which serves as our introduction to the real Cochrane, but it's also just a really hilarious scene of just Troi drunk out of her face on tequila trying to explain about, timeline, it's no time to argue about time. We don't have time. I feel like Marina Sirtis has experience of being drunk, because that is exactly how I've seen a lot of drunk people act.
So when I was rewatching it, my wife entered the room during that scene. She took a look at it and she said, it's really impressive how Marina Sirtis is channeling Lwaxana Troi for her drunk moment.
Wow.
Wow. Oh, wow.
That's a good point. I hadn't considered it as well.
She turns into her mom when she gets drunk.
Oh, we could have a whole podcast episode about that.
Definitely. Yeah, I just saw her desperately trying to maintain her composure and failing, because she's telling Will to get off her as he's trying to just help her to stay up, and she's trying to sound all professional, and she's trying to get all composed and it's a primitive culture. I'm just trying to blend in this kind of pseudo posh way of like, I'm doing my job. Don't criticize my techniques. You know? But again, I've seen that happen by drunk people that are like, I am not drunk. I refuse to acknowledge this. So it's just so funny. And like I said, the performances, well, from everyone in this scene, because from Cromwell and Frakes as well, are just great as kind of support for this. So yeah, I love that scene. And again, great use of humor. Speaking of which, we go back to the Enterprise and Data as everyone starts seeing the kind of assimilated corridors and the Borg appearing. Data mentions he feels anxiety, and Picard tells him to turn off his emotion chip. Says it's a good idea and does so. And then Picard's line of "Mr. Data, there are times I envy you" is both funny and incredibly impactful and true as well.
Yeah,
because again, that's screenwriting 101. Is like, we need a way to tell the audience that these characters are all bricking it, without actually having them just go, Mr. Data, I am incredibly anxious. And it achieves that, and it's also funny, you know? So I love it. Because again, it really does make you think like, oof, you've got a right to be anxious. Data attempts to break into engineering, but he basically just snaps off the control, again, leading to Picard's fantastically sarcastic, perhaps we should just knock. Data basically is captured and dragged into engineering. Several Borg are killed trying to attack, but then they adapt. And then there's the really horrific scene, which still gets me and which terrified me as a kid, of the security officer who's kind of helping them escape and then gets neck stabbed by the what would you call it? The injection tubules, the nanoprobes, I guess. Yeah. And we see firsthand for the first time this new kind of method of assimilation and how it's just literally, well, it's vampires, isn't it? You know, 2 stabs in the neck and then you're gone and you're dead. You know? So there's something horrific to me still of seeing the kind of grey veins and everything pulsing up that guy's face as he begs for help and Picard just shooting him dead. It's so brutal. It's like, oof, what is happening? There was humor a minute ago. You know? But yeah. But I'll mention that later and ask what you guys think of that, because I remember, again, it's one of those, it's kind of like the transporter accident from the motion picture in terms of scenes from Trek movies that traumatize the crap out of me. But retreating through the hatches anyway, Picard is grabbed by Lily, leading to the sweet scene where he shows her Earth and mentions that she was going to basically vaporize him if she'd fired the phaser, and her kind of, it's my first ray gun. Just sweetly, not quite understanding, and then, you know, looking at the force fields and seeing Earth and kind of being in awe in that nice Star Trek-y way. Meanwhile, Data is strapped to a gurney, and for the first time, he has a very individual-sounding female voice from the rafters, but we don't yet see who it is. So that's where I've took a pause here to ask a few questions, which the first of which is just, did you also find that one scene deeply traumatizing? I say when you were younger, I mean like now as well. It's pretty traumatic.
Totally. Well, first, the actor, oh my gosh, it was so good. I mean, like I so believed his terror and his fear. I mean,
the pain,
the makeup, it was so well done. And that was, I mean, I think that we've seen, you know, forms of assimilation, maybe, or moments of it in other Star Trek where you're like, okay, yeah, I mean, that sucks, but okay. But you watch that and you're like, yeah, no, I would want Picard to shoot me if that happened.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh man, something so relatable about just screaming for help and then that actor just absolutely selling the kind of just do something, and then Picard just zap doom. Horrible. But what about you, Eryn? Were you also traumatized? Are we bringing up past trauma for you here as well?
Well, it was an intense scene. I feel like as a kid watching it for the first time, I was already terrified. So when that happened, I was like, yeah, I get it. As an adult, it sinks into me how heavy that is and how hard it is to watch Picard be almost unhinged in a way. Like he's hiding it well, but I know what you mean. That's kind of a theme in this movie.
I don't know if I would necessarily say he'd done the wrong thing, obviously, but it is still very jarring to see happen, and you just really feel for the poor guy, because it is a matter of, like I say, there's times before this in Next Gen when assimilation, it would be a matter of, it would never have been instant. It would have been the Borg grab you and carry you somewhere, and then you know,
and then you come back and just
strip you and plug some attached parts to you and whatever, and But seeing it literally is just like, this guy was just there one moment, the next he's injected something in him and bang, he's gone. It's just ouch. But one of many horrible moments, I think, for me. Next thing I was going to sorry.
And I was going to say on there too, because you had said, I don't think that Picard did the wrong thing. And I agree. I don't think he did the wrong thing, but I think it's the how he did it. Like that is telling. And, this comes up later in the film, but he was absolutely heartless when he did it. There was no emotion and no acknowledgement that, like, literally 4 seconds ago, they were on the same, not only team or crew, but they were on the same squad moving through. They were, their lives depended on each other. And he took a breath and pulled the trigger. Boom. Just no second thought. And we know Jean-Luc Picard at this point, in Star Trek, and that's so not Picard. To just so coldly and heartlessly do that, even though it was you argue the mercy behind it. But I just think like there was that moment earlier where he starts getting into his trauma that I talked about earlier, and then like this is the point where it operationalizes, and then now he's on the roller coaster, the roller coaster that will be trauma, where Lily will be sitting right next to him in the car for him.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me as well, this, again, just tell me if this is just me, projecting my own thing. But for me, it also, I think when I first watched it and then every time since, again, it emphasizes to me how serious the threat of the Borg are, because it is kind of like the film telegraphing. This is not, we don't have time to sit and lament and, eulogize this chap and whatever. We are in a horrible, war situation. This guy is down where, we've already mentioned killing him would be doing him a favor compared to the alternative. And like you said, Picard is no nonsense and just no time to waste, just zap, killed, move on. So it's like, this is how serious this threat is. We kind of have to sacrifice a bit of our own humanity to fight this inhuman threat because it is so relentless, which again is a horrifying thought, but Anyway, what was I going to say? Yeah, my next question was just going to be, what did you guys think of the true introductions of Cochrane and Lily? And the way that they kind of, they seem like something else, and then Cochrane turns out to be the kind of drunk, doesn't care, and Lily seems kind of aggressively anti-everything, and then basically becomes the ideal, oh, wow, Earth from orbit is so beautiful.
I think that makes a lot of sense for Lily, actually, because seeing the juxtaposition between her and Cochrane in the very beginning when we're first introduced, she seems like the true believer. She's put her blood, sweat, and tears into this project that Cochrane is the theorist behind, but she seems to have done most of the work.
Yeah, and it's her that says to get to the Phoenix, isn't it, when they first get attacked, and he's like, screw the Phoenix or whatever.
So I can see Picard's speech to her and showing her Earth from orbit. Like, yeah, it makes sense because she wants to believe that.
Yeah. I love that she is kind of the Star Trek ideal. I'll mention it later, I'm sure, but throughout the movie, she kind of is that morality personified that we needed, I think, desperately, especially since they decided that Cochrane wasn't going to be that because they were telling a different story. And, whether you believe the Roddenberry analogy or not, he couldn't necessarily give you that. So we had Lily to fill that in. And, so there still was somebody at first contact who was that hopeful, kind of bright-eyed, I guess, optimist who was there. So, yeah, I like that a lot.
And I think she was a bright-eyed optimist that came from horror, right? She was, if not in World War III, was, part of the factions and the battles happening afterwards. She was a war-hardened individual who had a dream and was willing to work hard to make that dream happen. And when he opened that, the no glass window.
Exactly. Yeah.
It showed her that, like, I think in that moment, she's just like, everything that I've dreamt is possible. And it became so real. Yeah, I love everything about Lily. I think every reaction that she had, everything she did is so perfect for a person who's experienced what she has.
Completely. And I agree with you in terms of like kind of talking about somebody who's emerged from trauma as more hopeful. There's something really, and I don't want to get into it too much because it's not really my place, but there's something quite powerful about the fact that they cast a black woman to play that role as well. Because there's a lot of real life, non-World War III type trauma that we can already pull from there. It's like, oof.
Especially if you want to talk about Especially if you want to talk about a white guy theorist who has a lot of great ideas, and then the woman of color who actually makes it happen. But that's a
and then gets forgotten by history because the white guy gets a statue and she gets forgotten. But again, horribly realistic perhaps, but we're not here to discuss that necessarily. The last talking point that I was going to mention was just do you both think it was an effective introduction to the Queen to have the kind of disembodied voice and not know what or who she was at first, but be so intrigued by it? Because obviously we hadn't heard Borg talk at this point, and it was I remember feeling it was really weird and like, who's this? What's going on?
I thought it was a great twist, and then it lets you sit in it a little bit before it comes back and introduces her.
Yeah, exactly. I do love that it doesn't. It's as you said. There's whole scenes between just hearing a disembodied female voice and then revealing her. So you are left thinking like, what is that? What's going on? That's not the collective voice. What is it?
And you got Data there asking all those questions that you have.
Yes,
right? Like,
exactly.
It's like, well, I think that, so there is no I, you're a collective. What's this? And I mean, it was just that. I think that was a fantastic introduction.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. So moving on, then we get the surface team briefing Cochrane on the Borg and the specifics of what First Contact will be and its meaning. He sees the Enterprise through the telescope, initially not believing, but then realizing, and beautifully name drops the franchise for the first time. You people, you're all astronauts on some kind of Star Trek. Insert DiCaprio recognition meme.
He said the thing.
He said the thing. But he agrees to basically help because, why not? And he's heard all of this. So then we cut to the Borg Queen introducing herself properly to Data, which, again, it's been said a million times, but how good is the special effect of the disembodied head lowering from the ceiling into the body? And it's all one shot with no breaks, and it's beautiful. It's just I'm in awe of special effects when moments like that, when it's like, how did it happen? And then I saw the behind the scenes of how it was done, and for some reason I was even more impressed, because it's like Alice Krieg lying just spread eagled flat on a board so that her head pokes through this prosthetic. And then just, it's so weird to see like her in like a blue body stocking type thing all the way down so it's blue screened out. And the fact that they're able to do that, and then in place of having the camera cut away, they have the clip sort of pulling the skin in to disguise the fact that they're cutting from the effect to like now she's in full costume and walking away kind of thing. I love it. It's brilliant. The special effects nerd in me I could just watch this one scene and talk about over and over how good it is. So then she basically starts explaining herself in some really good, but let's be honest, pretty cryptic dialogue, because the concept of a queen doesn't make sense. So they just address that by technobabble and kind of whatever else. She activates Data's emotion chip, which leads to some great acting by Brent Spiner as he tries to claim he's not frightened, but clearly is. And the Queen reveals the arm skin and seductively blows on it, but then makes the obvious clanger reference of, was that good for you? Which is a bit kind of on the nose even for me. I'm like, oh, love. Dial it down like one notch, But Picard briefs Lily about the future, the Federation, and the Borg, and how many incorrect corridors the ship has to walk through. Again, just beautiful humor in the tense moment as the Borg sounds Swedish. Then she sees the Borg, screams, and just responds, definitely not Swedish. Always makes me laugh. Picard, of course, goes into the Dixon Hill holodeck program, which is a nice callback to his love of those books in Next Gen. He explains how holographic bullets can kill and basically shoots the Borg with a Tommy gun, and breaks into just pure rage in, again, a brilliant acting moment, as Lily reveals that it's one of Starfleet's uniforms on the Borg, and Picard points out that it was Ensign Lynch. And Lily just, I think at that moment, along with the rest of us, is like, there's a little bit of disconnect here from reality just going on. As if that opening scene of the shooting the guy because he'd been assimilated wasn't bad enough, now he's just savagely beating on this poor Ensign Lynch guy. Back on the surface, we have the Reg Barkley cameo as he kind of makes Ephraim Cochrane nervous with the hero worship. Like, I want to shake your hand. He makes a pee joke, basically, I have to take a leak, don't you? Which is always appreciated, and tries to run off, which is then the scene basically leaves us there. On the Enterprise, Picard and Lily arrive at the bridge, and it's revealed that the Borg have stopped their advance at deflector control. Picard surmises it's to contact the Delta Quadrant and bring reinforcements via the Borg of this era, and asks if Worf remembers his zero-G training, suggesting that they take a little stroll. And again, I took a pause there.
I remember that it made me sick to my stomach.
What are you suggesting? I love that. And then just as they go out, just like, how are you doing, Mr. Worf? Not well, sir. Try not to focus at the stars, just look on the hull. And the camera pans out to show us the ship just upside down, completely jarringly, as we're kind of like, what? What's going on? But yeah, awesome. So the first question I have here is obviously just how about that Borg Queen introduction? Were you all as impressed as I was, or is it one of those things where special effects have advanced so much it's not as impressive maybe anymore?
I think it's still really neat, and the detail of when she goes into the suit and the clamps attach and then pull at her skin is like, it just really, they did a great job on that.
Yeah,
it could have been. It could have been so corny now. Like that's an effect you like. I think you even said it. You would expect to not age well, right? But it looks awesome. Still, it's horrifying. It's gross, and it's perfect.
Yeah, and it's just it's compelling. And again, related to what you were saying, you mentioned there's probably some HR Geiger influence. And I remember reading that there was that, but there was also, I don't know if you've ever seen, is it Captain EO, the movie? Where Angelica Houston plays this kind of disembodied female cyborg. There's a lot of inspiration taken, I think, from that as well. And obviously, given that it's kind of advanced technology in cinema, there's always going to be the forebearer of the false Maria robot from Metropolis, which I think all female cyborgs kind of owe a debt to. So I can kind of see that lineage as well, in terms of, like, you know, robot who is too seductive compared to humans and kind of thing. So yeah, I love it. I just love the way the Queen's portrayed in the film. Is as much as I don't love the concept of the Borg having a queen necessarily, I think the portrayal and the acting just sells it to me, and the direction. So awesome.
Yeah, and I think kind of to what Eryn was saying earlier, that her approach to try and seduce Data in there, I mean, was the perfect approach. And she played it. I mean, you can't, there's so many just great acting performances in this thing. And Alex Krieg, just that perfect mix of manipulation, of seduction, sexiness, right? I mean, for a slimy zombie, she just kind of exudes this sexuality that is magnetic, you know, where you're like, I get it. I get why Data is reacting this way. Also, I feel gross for understanding. I mean, it's just, her performance and the special effects and the makeup created this cognitive dissonance that really, I think, put you in Data's position in a really, really good way.
Yes, definitely. Because as I say, I think there's a degree of admiring the special effects as well. That's kind of like, oh, it looks beautiful that you've achieved this, and then you find yourself like admiring the Queen herself, and you're like, ooh, that's not good. What's going on here?
I think also if you did this scene any earlier in Star Trek, right? It wouldn't work because the effects wouldn't have been there. And I can look back and imagine if they did this in even one of the TOS movies or even TOS itself.
Yeah.
And I'd love to see it. I'd pay real money to see it, but I would see it once and I'd laugh.
They wouldn't have bothered with the effects. It would have just ended up looking something like the Ilea probe from the motion picture. It would just be a woman with like a gem on her head or something. Yeah. Fair enough. The other question I was going to ask was just, do you guys, what do you think of the placement of the holodeck in the story? Does it make sense to you? And do you like how it was used to explain the Borg's ability to adapt and how, you know, Tommy Gunn would work better? Again, for a non-Trek viewer, it would probably be very jarring to just go from horror movie about cyborg zombies to now we're in a nightclub scene in a 40s and detective noir, you know?
It was entirely for the fans.
Yeah, exactly.
They even brought back like Ruby for the Dixon Hill novels.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
It was great, but I would be confused if I hadn't watched TNG.
Yeah, because there's even he's in there and he's like, this is the wrong chapter, you know, and it's like you have to come in with a level of knowledge about a holo novel, right, in order for that to really make a lot of sense.
I think they do kind of see, this is where I have a bit of cognitive dissonance, because being a Trek fan, I can't speak to how well it does it, but I think the fact that Picard explains, well, Lily explains it first at the end, you know, I thought it was a bunch of holograms. And then Picard explains, without the safety protocols, even a holographic bullet could kill. I think that gives you as much as you would need if you were a first-time viewer, hopefully, to get it, But, it is just a weird kind of placement in the script because they just think, like, I get that, functionally it's there because you need some way to kill a Borg so that you can get the beacon and figure out their plan.
And in an unexpected way.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like, what was somebody smoking that day when they were like, I have an idea, a Dixon Hill holodeck program. That's how we'll do it.
The entire thing was orchestrated to get Patrick Stewart in that suit and to get him with the
and Alfred Woodard in that dress.
Yeah. And that one guy with that nose.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. As we head back in, then the three guys begin their walk onto the deflector, as we mentioned. In engineering, the Borg Queen has some just epic dialogue, which I wouldn't even try to get into because it's like a full page, but basically continuing to try to tempt Data, referring to his quest to be human and how the perfection that they've achieved is by the mixture of organic and technological. She then basically just asks him to have sex in a pretty famous scene. She's like, I'm fully functional. How long has it been since you used them? Which, again, with geeky accuracy, he gives us a date that points exactly back to his relationship with Tasha Yar in The Naked Now. So all of us Trekkies in the cinema were like, oh, we know. Even though it would mean nothing to anybody else. But yeah, still very well acted, though, that scene, as you say, because the Queen, through all these prosthetics, has to be seductive and has to actually seem genuinely sexy, and then has seen where she has to effectively say, let's have sex and kiss him, and you have to believe it, and it could so easily have been terrible and just dropped like a clanger, but somehow it works through the use of acting and stuff. So kudos to Brent and Alice, I think, in that one. And then obviously the deflector action scene, what can you say? It's just one of my favorite action scenes in cinema, just because it's genius. It uses the unique nature of the anti-gravity, the fact that it involves three people having to do the maglock just kind of makes logical sense, but also gives you the stakes perfectly so that you can ramp it up with each scene that goes by. The fact that you have one person get assimilated, one person seem to suffer an emergency decompression, but then figure out a way around it, just all of this. It's just this entire sequence. It's not something I could describe because it's not really a very wordy type thing. It's very visual, but it's just a really impressive, incredibly directed action scene, and I recommend anyone watching it. So yeah, that basically leads to them eventually foiling the Borg, although they have lost Lieutenant Redshirt, or Lieutenant Hawk, sorry. It's glorious in terms of kind of Worf moments in this film, like you mentioned, when they kind of free the deflector to stop them from sending a signal, and Worf just gives it, assimilate this, when he blows it up.
That was one powerful phaser rifle right there. Like, boom.
Well, I mean, they did mention that it was charged with antiprotons, and if you hit something, it would blow up half the ship. So it's disconnected. You just hit the right spot, and it blows up the deflector, I guess.
But with Worf too, cool. Like, hey, we're going to get in your 0G gear that you hate. Also, just going to happen to pack a knife, because why not?
Yeah, bring your mechleth. Just in case.
Exactly.
Just down the suit foot or whatever, as all of the spacesuit, as if that isn't just a danger waiting to happen, just popping out the bottom. Oops, don't decompression, bend. You've cut the suit.
Yeah, don't bend in the weird way, because you're gonna.
But again,
I love how they do it too.
Hero.
This whole scene where he's like, oh no, this Borg's coming, and it's literally the scene from Austin Powers where the steamroller is coming at him. It's so slow. He's like, oh no, there's a Borg. I guess what I'm going to do is slowly reach. Are you getting this, camera? I'm going to reach behind me. You see, good angle, cool. Well, I brought my mechleth. I brought my knife. Let's do this.
But it's true of the scene with Hawk as well, though. Because the Borg advancing on him, you as a viewer, again, you're doing that horror movie thing where you're screaming the whole time. For crying out loud, just look up. It's approaching you at no speed. You've got ample time to defend yourself, and he's there struggling with the flipping controls. Like, oh, this is stuck. I'm not going to look up at all.
I love though also how the Borg just ignored him until they flipped the chips around. Then they're like, oh, hey, oh no, there's something going on over here. Here we go.
What are you trying to do? Yeah, that's the Borg's entire thing, isn't it? Yeah, ignore till you're a threat or a target. But
and now I'm going to walk at you like at the speed of molasses running uphill to give you every chance to respond, but I know you're not going to. So here we go.
One last thing about that scene that I will say that I always loved, because I just thought it was really clever, is that because they adapt, obviously they have to come up with other ways. And so Worf, Klingon knife. Hawk, just sacrifice yourself, give up. But Picard's brilliant technique of like firing at the sort of surface, so that it basically pops out like a jet of steam that just blows the Borg off into space. I'm like, that is genius. Who thought of that yet again? Just great action moments.
It's a fun scene.
The Borg Queen, of course, immediately notices and mentions they have a change of plan because she does not seem happy that their kind of beacon or whatever has now been destroyed. We cut back to the surface. Cochrane has been phasered to basically stop him from running away. And again, we hear that Geordie mentioned about the statue of Cochrane, and as Riker chastises him for, you told him about the statue, because he was all, I don't want to be a statue. I love the humor here. It's just banter back and forth, but it's so good. I couldn't do it justice, but yeah, trust me, it's funny. So because he's been phasered and now he's ready, he's now in the Phoenix, getting prepared to make the flight for first contact, mentioning that he's hungover and it's either from the whiskey or the laser beam or both, which again, fair enough. And then again, this is the scene I mentioned earlier in terms of like, how did we not see that this might be an allegory for Roddenberry? Because it's Riker talking about, I don't think you're a saint, but you had a vision. And Cochrane mentioning his vision was of dollar signs and money and retiring to a tropical island of naked women. He doesn't even fly. He takes trains. And then Riker giving it, someone once said, don't try to be a great man, just be a man and let history make its judgments. That's rhetorical nonsense. Who said that? You did 10 years from now. Which is just one of those great time travel-y type moments that blows your mind, isn't it? So very nice. Very Roddenberry-esque, I think. Cutting back to the Enterprise, then on the bridge, Picard is determined to stay and fight, but Worf and Crusher suggest that the Enterprise is lost at this point. Picard basically insults Worf rather stupidly, calling him a coward who wants to run away. Worf points out quite rightly that if he was any other man, he would kill him where he stands, and Picard orders him off the bridge. Crusher suggests that once the captain's made up his mind, the decision is done. He stormed off into the observation lounge, but Lily is not having it and decides to follow him. I'm going to move to the next scene because it's my favorite scene in cinema history, basically, which is that observation lounge scene. Surprisingly how late in the film it comes, because I always just imagined it was more of the midpoint. But yeah, basically Picard heading to the observation lounge, and then I can't praise it enough. A perfect example as Lily basically talks him through of how writing can lead you to a main character change in their mind, but you absolutely follow along and you believe it. So it's Lily sort of talking Picard through how everyone thinks that staying and fighting is suicide, but Picard understands the Borg, and then she compares him to Ahab in Moby Dick, and he doesn't see it at first and then rages out, destroys the model spaceships, takes a moment in the quiet as Lily just reinforces the Ahab comparison, so that then it registers with him, and he repeats a passage of dialogue, or a misquotes slightly a passage from the book, and then you actually literally, as I said, follow the process of changing his mind throughout this scene, and it's just so well acted. Like I said, I cannot mention enough just how they should study this scene in acting classes, and yeah, I just absolutely love it. And I love that, like I said, that it would be so easy to just be at a place where the plot has to have Picard change his mind, and the scene that does it is kind of disappointing or a letdown, but I think it delivers everything it needs to, and I completely believe every word out of both actors' mouths, and the motivation I'm just following all the way. Yeah, Picard basically changes his mind, gives the evacuation order, and again has the most awesome moment with Worf as he basically regrets what he said to him, and I just love that the film takes that moment there, sets the self-destruct with Crusher and Worf, and then there's a little bit of lamenting to the Enterprise E, and will they build another one? Yes, there's plenty of letters left in the alphabet, which is a nice moment. Picard's about to leave, but here's Data, presumably amongst the Borg consciousness, I don't know. And as Lily suggests, he goes to find his friend, because he mentions he owes him, since Data and Worf were the ones that rescued him from the Borg ship back in Next Gen. So where are we? The Phoenix is ready, but Cochrane has forgotten something, so they panic. Tilly reveals that it's basically just a little future compact disc, I guess, and he blasts a magic carpet ride as indeed this one starts rocking to the stars. So that's your Phoenix takeoff scene, which is good. Picard enters engineering, visibly unnerved, as the Borg Queen asks Locutus if something's familiar. He suddenly remembers that she was at Wolf 359 and a bit of a dodgy retcon, and says that he thinks in small terms because the ship was destroyed, but okay. He mentions again, you wanted an equal and a counterpart. Again, retcon, but okay, we'll follow it. He volunteers to give himself willingly, but Data, with now visible human skin, won't go. and she reveals she's already found her equal, and Picard will make an excellent drone. So I stopped here for one final pause before the final act, just to say, do we have thoughts on Picard's Vendetta and on that scene? Are we all as impressed as I am with it in the observation lounge?
I am.
Oh,
yeah. So good. I think when I think a lot of, I think of this movie as part 4 of Best of Both Worlds, right? So you got Best of Both Worlds 1 and 2, Family is part 3, and then this is part 4 in there. And he starts to process through his trauma in Family. He starts to, right? And here nearly a decade has passed, and this is like that moment where it comes to a head. We see something like this echoed in, not to this extreme point, but we see it somewhat echoed in season 1 of Picard, where he talks about how the Borg are just monsters. They're relentless. They are, what did he say? They don't change. They metastasize. And he just has so much hatred for them. He reaches some catharsis, I think, in Picard, but this is, I think, so good. And Lily is just perfect. Could you imagine not just standing up to Jean-Luc Picard, but standing up to Patrick Stewart, right, in this moment? And she is there for it and is so good. This scene is tour de force. Absolute.
It really is. I've mentioned it before, but I think if award ceremonies and things weren't so biased against science fiction, for me, genuinely, this is like an award-winning scene between these two actors that would, if this was a drama or a, I don't know, historical epic or whatever, you'd be talking Oscars, I think, personally. Not wanting to sound too highfalutin, but I do think it's that good a performance from both Patrick Stewart and Alfre Woodard. And as you say, the fact that they're both basically challenging each other in terms of like who's going to be the best actor in the scene is impressive as well. So yeah, definitely love it. So are we okay with the kind of retcons to the Borg Queen being there during Best of Both Worlds? Or, not so much.
I'm okay with it. I mean, I've had a long time to come to peace with it, though.
Yeah. Fair enough. That's, I guess. I don't know, because I don't love the fact that it also leads to Picard. I've never been all right with him volunteering to kind of, and I get the whole point is that it's a self-sacrifice and it's nobility, as the Queen says, and it's to try and save Data, but I'm like, there's not really anywhere near enough like level of trauma to him as he basically volunteers to become Locutus forever and whatnot, and I'm like, this scene just jars with me horribly, and I don't know if you need it. I don't know if you need to mention that the Queen was necessarily there the whole time at the Wolf 359. You could even just mention that they'd briefly met and she did off in a shuttle or something. I don't know. But for me, that scene is a little jarring. What about you, Jeff?
I don't know. I'm kind of with Eryn on this, where I think at first it felt weird. I don't even know if it did at first, and it is a little weird, but I think in the end it's kind of one of those, well, okay things. I think a lot of this, though, is built to set up what's going to come with Data when he fires the torpedoes. Like, this is all that to set up. But I think they had so much foresight when they put this film out that they were planting seeds for Picard season 1.
Again, unintentionally, but I think
right. Well, I think it was fully intentional. They clearly have the whole universe planned out at this point. But but I think the scenes at the end of season 1 of Picard, and really the whole thing showing just the impact of Data's death, and everything and how they come together. To me, that makes his willingness to sacrifice himself for Data in that scene makes sense.
Right.
At the time and in the moment, I agree. I think it was a little extreme for him to be like, yeah, sure, I'll go into that hell again. No problem. Yeah. But when I have that end cap of him and Data in that study in the quantum place where they were connecting, now it does make sense to me. It just took 30 years or 20 years or whatever to make that scene make sense for me.
That's fair. I appreciate that perspective. Actually, that is a very a good way of conceptualizing that a bit better in my head as well. So yeah, it's fair enough. The other thing I was just going to mention here, because I haven't yet briefly, is to say massive props to the soundtrack to this movie, and I'm not just talking about the couple of kind of rock and roll needle drops, which are good, but Jerry Goldsmith's score throughout is just outstanding, isn't it? So yeah, I have to mention. I saw a few reviews that said that, and I'm like, yes, absolutely, I agree.
Totally.
The score is fantastic. Oh, and the introduction of the Klingon bit when Worf makes his appearance, and I think even the main theme of the movie makes its way into Picard season 1 a little bit.
Yeah. I love the way that the main theme plays on the opening and closing credits, though, to soaring kind of effect. It's very good.
Star Trek does soundtracks so well. Always. From
absolutely.
Totally.
But as I said, also as well, props to deciding to use Steppenwolf as the Phoenix takes off, and then just random Roy Orbison at the very end of the movie. So,
Roy Orbison's the Ooby Dooby song, right?
Yeah, which apparently the people that made the film hate and said that they wish they'd chosen a different song now. But what the heck?
So
it's fun.
I thought it would be so funny if like all of the Starfleets knew the Ooby Dooby song from like primary school civics.
Right? It's part of First Contact Day.
Yeah. Like, oh yeah, I remember having to listen to this in school.
Every First Contact Day, school kids just have to arrange an orchestra to play Ooby Dooby. Love it. Fair enough. So yeah, I'll get into the final act then, which obviously, just to conclude things, we've been here a while. So the Phoenix prepares to engage, but we've mentioned already, Drama Queen Data decides to waste 3 torpedoes and changes his mind within a millisecond and barks a quick Schwarzenegger-style catchphrase of resistance is futile. Again, we mentioned already they set up the plasma coolant tanks, which here obviously get smashed, and they melt the Borg Queen along with Data's new skin, which... Yeah, the Queen tries to jump out. Data basically saves Picard by pulling her into the coolant that melts her. The Queen's death conveniently disables every other Borg on board the ship. There's lovely references with Zeph from Cochrane when he goes to warp and then looks back and says the Earth looks so small, but it's about to get bigger. Calling back to Riker seeing the moon in an earlier scene and mentioning that it was so different in his time because you could see, the people living there in Tycho City and New Berlin and Lake Armstrong and everything. So it's quite that sort of Trek, like, moment, The ship lands and the Vulcans are revealed to much pomp and circumstance. The T'Plana Hath lands, and basically we get, again, a really sweet scene of the Vulcans giving a live long and prosperous salute. Cochrane not being able to do it and simply shaking their hand and saying thanks, which is really sweet. Picard and Lily have a very sweet moment of just Lily envying the world Picard's going to, and Picard envying Lily living through history, basically. And as we mentioned, the Enterprise just duplicates the Borg time travel somehow with a couple of button presses and heads back to the future. So, yeah, why not?
They hit a speed of 88 warps per hour, and
exactly. So the final things I was going to mention then for talking points before we get into the bigger sort of favorite moments and stuff was just, do you find the conclusion satisfying or a bit too silly? Is the First Contact moment really powerful for you? It connects to me. And yeah, First Contact, it launched a spin-off, a Star Trek Day, and it's become hugely famous. So can you perhaps put your finger on what it is that's become so that moment has become like a pivotal cornerstone in Trek fandom as much as it has in the false fake history of this world? I know that's a lot of questions, but
yeah. I think I still have a hard time with Lily not getting any credit for this.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Yeah,
I think it makes sense, and they telegraphed the plasma conduit solution really early. I think that was just really good writing, setting up the expectations and then following through.
Yeah, and it does kind of fit the horror movie theme because it's surprising to me that it literally shows you the flesh literally melting off her as she screams. I was like, wow, they are showing you this, aren't they? So yeah, and then still have Picard smash the metal spine just to make sure. So next thing I asked you both for was your favorite character, moment, and line, and we'll all three of us give that. So we'll start with saying, what's your favorite character in the movie? And I'll start with you, Eryn.
I'm going to go with Riker.
Okay.
I just really like Riker in general, but and this ties into my it's all tied together, but when he finds Deanna and Cochrane in the beginning, how he and Deanna have this long-running relationship, right? They're very close. It goes way back. There's not a hint of jealousy of like, how dare you talk to her like that? He absolutely trusts her to be in control of the situation. And then he realizes she's drunk, and it's just like he's just having fun with this person that he's very good friends with.
Yeah, that's true. That's fair enough. Okay, awesome. So was that your main reasons for Riker, just the kind of relatability, I guess?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So what about you, Jeff? Who's your favorite character in the movie and why?
I go back and forth between Lily and Worf. And
Okay.
Lily, I think for obvious reasons. I mean, we've talked about her throughout this whole conversation and just how awesome she is and how she provides that Star Trek, that we all need. But I think Worf just got the short end of the stick through all 7 seasons of The Next Generation. But he's so on point through this whole thing. And I think, again, like, I can't help but look at things through that leadership kind of lens. And what we're seeing is someone in their young steps of going from being an expert in their field to becoming, an overall leader of a full organization. And he plays that so well, where he puts himself in uncomfortable situations with the deflector dish. He comes in and is immediate, like, he's still like bloodied up from getting off the Defiant when he comes on the Enterprise. And he's like, where can I help? Where can I, I'm going to do this thing, all the way to the end where he calls Picard on his BS. And he's like, I would, if you weren't so amazing, I would kill you right now. Yeah. And then to me, it comes around to where Picard acknowledges that he's screwed up. I'm gonna say my favorite character in this one was Worf.
Fair enough. My favorite character was Lily, but it's for a lot of the similar reasons that you already kind of mentioned. So I just said, again, I went back and forth. I could have picked Picard or a few others, but it was definitely Lily because she's the Star Trek spirit, even though she's from before the kind of correct time in universe, which is all the more impressive. And she's the one who literally has to push both Cochrane and Picard to do the right thing, ultimately. She's the voice of reason for both. What is your favorite moment or scene in the film then? And again, Eryn, we'll begin with you.
The holodeck scene.
Wow, okay. That was the one that I thought was most out of place, but okay.
It's very out of place. It's very out of place, but it's just campy. It's fun. It's
okay.
Mickey the nose striking the match on his nose. It's great.
Yeah,
great cameo.
Star Trek does occasionally do campy fun as well, so it's just as valid, I guess. Awesome. Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Yeah, you were saying.
Oh yeah, no. Ethan Phillips was like, it's always fun seeing somebody, like a cameo like that.
Yeah,
he was awesome too. I loved how he played I loved Ethan.
It's fun seeing him out of makeup.
Yeah. He went uncredited as well because he didn't want anybody. He wanted it to be like a surprise for the fans to work out if it was really him or not. So he's never been credited for the role, but he's just fun.
That's clever.
We'll go to you then next, Jeff, and ask for your favorite moment or scene in the movie.
My favorite moment, I think, is one that people gloss over and might think it's kind of just like a quick moment or whatever. But it's the second that Picard decides, he's like, you know what? Forget all this. We're going to go fight in there. So I'm straight up going to disobey and violate orders I was given. If you don't want to, that's cool. I'll note it on my log. Just let me know now.
Yeah, and Data's kind of support vocally as well as the fact that Data gives the vocal support and then the entire bridge crew are shown smiling like, yep.
Yep, exactly. I think it like that's a culmination of all 7 seasons of The Next Generation where they're like, of course, we're going to support you doing this thing. And of course, you're going to violate Starfleet's orders because it's the right thing to do. But also Picard's cool. So he's like, look, I'm not gonna get you in any trouble here. So like, if you don't want to do it, cool. Like, I don't know, just it checked all the boxes for me. And to me, it's just like, that's the Next Generation crew being awesome together.
Yeah. I just said I could name like a dozen scenes because I love so many of them, but the one that I had to go with was, for obvious reasons, the conference room scene. And I've talked it up enough without wanting to get into it and gush anymore. But yeah, I just love that scene. I think it's an incredible, well-written, well-acted, brilliant scene. So
totally,
that will be my favorite moment in the film. And finally, your favorite line from the movie, Eryn.
Now's not the time to argue about time. We don't have the time.
I was hoping someone would pick that. That is great. That is a perfect example of a drunken sci-fi. Awesome. And what about yourself, Jeff?
That was totally going to be mine because it's, it's so good. But I had a second just in case, and it's from the scene that you had mentioned. There, it's just the line must be drawn here, no further. and he just delivers it with so much Patrick Stewart.
So much great delivery.
Yeah. Oh, I love that line.
The almost venom of I will make them pay for what they've done.
Yeah.
Well, there's just chills. But yeah, awesome. My favorite line, weirdly enough, it kind of comes from left field, but it's actually Picard's delivery of the line to Worf. As a matter of fact, I think the bravest man I've ever known. Because there's something in the way that Patrick Stewart delivers it, and just the very slightest of vocal cracks, and I fully believe it, and it's just like, it's so evocative. Wow. And I'm like, that gets me every single time, because again, it's one of those things where if you've lived with these characters for 7 or 8 years and you know the history there, and then you just get one line that sums it all up so perfectly, and I'm like, oh wow, that hit me in the sweet spot. So I'm going to go with that one, even though I will say that I have noted that Troy's entire drunken tirade is a very close second.
So good.
I will go briefly into the audience interaction section. Just because
incoming transmission.
Random social media post, as I always do, asking what are your thoughts on the movie Star Trek First Contact. I have had to select a few because I will say I put it onto my personal Twitter and I have like 170 odd replies. So if anybody's
Just
curious about a lot of people's thoughts about First Contact, by all means go and find that post. If I can find a way to share it somewhere, I will try. But I have got a few that I wanted to read here, and then I'll get into our conclusions and scores at the end. But just to give you an idea of kind of the responses in general, at Aliyah Giselle says, I feel it's the best of the next-gen movies, best Trek movie overall. I'd still go Wrath of Khan. Great use of the Borg and Picard having to deal with his feelings on them. Alice Krieger is excellent as the Borg Queen, and the performance of Alfre Woodard stands out to me as well. A relatively long one here from Nerd Heaven podcast. And they say, my favorite Star Trek movie, definitely the best of the TNG films. Wonderful, creepy tone, powerful character moments from Picard, wonderful performances from Alfre Woodard and James Cromwell, nice 30th anniversary nods to DS9, Voyager, and the original series. Amazing score from Jerry Goldsmith. Introducing the concept of a queen was perhaps not the best course of action for the Borg, but I totally accepted it because Alice Krieger was amazing. Going back in time to assimilate post-World War III Earth didn't make a whole lot of sense plot-wise, but again, I overlook that because everything else in the film was so darn good. So, there you go. Sam at Do the Next Thing says, best TNG film for sure. So many fun and iconic moments. The best Trek films are big action set pieces with thinky plots, and this is emblematic. Commodore Decker says, this film is almost sacrosanct. I've lost all objectivity over time, and I learn or glean something new each time I watch it, which I do several times a year. I was lucky to be working at a movie theater when it debuted, and I still have my posters. It's nearly perfect. So there we go. If I could just... at AKA Starlord, my occasional co-host, chimed in. This is DK to say, definitely the best of the TNG movies with fantastic direction, great set pieces, and a sublime soundtrack. A great installment, despite the introduction of a concept I was not at first overly fond of, the Queen. And yeah, First Contact overall was just okay. Although the best of the next-gen movies, it is still fairly middle of the road. It's a bit harsh, but okay. At Optimum Surf just says, a girl I dated in high school did Foley, so it's a classic in my world. All right. At Beverage_Fred says, I'm not a fan of time travel. I think it gets used too much. Best Star Trek movie is Wrath of Khan. At Subcommander Tal says, it may be an unpopular opinion, but I didn't care for it. I thought the Borg lost some originality by having a central authority. Didn't enjoy the characterization of Zeph from Cochrane, and the scene with the Vulcans felt forced somehow. Just my personal opinion. Where are we? And then finally, at Mr. Robert Brendan says, it's easily the best. The atmosphere, great setup, great performances from all, but especially Patrick Stewart, Alfre Woodard's You Broke Your Little Ships moment, and also Alice Krieger. Sublime direction from at Jonathan S. Frakes, and just the most beautifully haunting theme I've ever heard. And because he was tagged, that post was liked by one Mr. Jonathan Frakes, who, if you happen to be listening, sir, good work in the movies. I do like it. So, yeah. There's some dissenting voices, but overall it seems quite positive. So, with that in mind, I will jump to our official thoughts on the matter. So, I did ask you both for like a brief paragraph or two conclusion and a score out of 5 stars. Do you both have those ready for me?
Oh, yeah.
Awesome. Do you want to go first again then, Eryn?
Oh, yeah. My conclusion is that this is a really excellent movie, but it's a really excellent data movie, which I think maybe sets up the way the franchise approaches the movies from here on out. But
fair enough. Yeah.
I rank it a solid 4 out of 5 stars.
Okay. Okay, 4 out of 5.
Yeah,
Fair enough.
One of the better ones, but my favorite will always be Star Trek 6.
Okay, fair. That's a lot of Star Trek. Well, everybody has their favorites too. 6 is popular, First Contact, so fair enough. What about you then, Jeff? Your conclusion and score out of 5, please.
I think this was an excellent movie. I consider this to be the first of the Next Generation movies. I think Generations is the hybrid, right, in there, and so it's the first of them. And to Aaron's point, I cannot disagree at all. It's a Picard and Data story with everyone else as set dressing on there, and what wonderful dressing it is. I think though that this movie poses up against really tough questions. It tackles trauma in a way and in a time that we as a society weren't ready to tackle. So like much all Star Trek was ahead of its time. I'm going to also give this a 4 out of 5 in there. I think that the Next Generation movies were great. They were not what the TOS movies were. And my favorite of the TNG films is actually Insurrection. So I know I just lost credibility with most people listening, but I think it was an excellent film. My favorite, Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan.
Fair enough.
But yeah, I give us a solid 4 out of 5.
Yeah, fair enough. I just said absolutely sublime. I've tried to be objective, knowing what this film means to me personally, as I've explained, but it's the film for me that just connected at the right time, that I've seen dozens of times, that I know every scene of by heart and can lip sync the dialogue as I watch. Which I really can. So maybe there's some bias, but watching it again with a critical eye, I still just think it's so good. The direction is outstanding, cinematic, flashy without being overwhelming, and coupled with acting, getting some of the best performances you'll see in any film. I truly believe that. The plot is brilliant, building on an existing story without relying on it, and beautifully weaving in movie moment action scenes, spot-on comedy, and that elusive Trek ideology of hope for the future. I wish there wasn't a bit of a stigma on sci-fi and Star Trek in general, because there are times I wish I was brave enough to say this is my favorite movie of all time. It's very definitely a contender. And I went with 5 stars out of 5. So I'm a bit of an outlier, a bit of the supporter, I guess, who's giving it a little bit more love than the other two of my guests here. So, but no shade. It's all good. But yeah, I think I've explained why it's kind of an important film for me and why I absolutely love it. So hopefully I've justified that in my ramblings. And so, yeah, all that's left to do is to combine those scores to get the podcast average then. At which point the average comes out. The podcast has decided that Star Trek First Contact is officially 4.33 stars out of 5. So not bad at all. I think is definitely the takeaway from that. A very, very, very good film. And if you're a Trek fan, I think you'll love it probably even more. But I would love to know, if you are a Trek newbie, what you thought of this movie, because I've always wondered. So there you go. Yeah, awesome. So it was great talking about one of my favorite movies and to be joined by 2 new friends. So thank you both so much for joining me to talk. Apologies for rambling a lot and keeping you for so long. But,
no, it was a blast.
Yeah, there's nothing else I'd rather be doing. Let's go 2 more hours. I mean, we could talk about this film a lot more.
Oh, I could if you'd let me, but yeah. So did you want to shout out kind of where people can find you and your other kind of projects and podcasts? And we'll start again with you, Eryn. Why not?
Oh, yeah, sure. So my wife and I host a podcast called The Spinal Frontier. It's a biology podcast. And you can follow us on Instagram at Spinal Frontier Pod and on Twitter at Spinal Frontier.
Okay, awesome. And what about you, Jeff?
Well, first, I have to tell you that you need to listen to The Spinal Frontier. It's become one of my favorite podcasts. I really enjoy how Eryn and Kelly break things down and provide insights into Star Trek that I had never even imagined before. So definitely give it a listen. I have a podcast, the Starfleet Leadership Academy, where it's a leadership podcast where I watch an episode of Star Trek and then pull out leadership, management, communication lessons from it and share those. It's a huge part of my passion. I also do leadership speaking and consulting as part of that. And you can find me anywhere you get your podcasts, or you can follow me on social media at Jeff T. Aiken. That's Akin. Thank you so much for having us today. This has been fantastic.
Thanks for being
great
so much. Yeah, as I say, you can always find me at Iron Mike Wilson on Twitter, or my name everywhere else, where Mike Wilson's are bought and sold. The podcasts that I sort of own and run, there is at HoM Trek or HoM Trek for the Star Trek on this podcast, or at podcast_screen for the Silver Screen podcast. And through there, you can link to our YouTube channels and Spotify and what have you. This obviously is the final episode in this particular series of the famous Star Trek podcast. Concludes our kind of look at the Borg and AI. So we will not be back for more next week, but I am hoping to get Series 3 up and running sooner rather than later, and hopefully before the end of the year. And I can officially reveal that the theme for Series 3 that was chosen by Democratic Twitter poll will be time travel stories. So there we go. Thanks again for joining me, guys. And everyone, remember, we are Starfleet. Live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper.